Thank you, everybody. First, let me do the mandatory check on the technology. Where should I be pointing this? Right there? Oh, there we go. Okay. So again, thank you all for coming on. I assume a good chunk of you are here because it's air conditioned and you've escaped the heat. So whatever reason brings you today, I'm thankful you're here. Two things I want to do today. One is I want to spend a little bit of time introducing the JUUL product to you. And then I want to spend the majority of the time talking about how JUUL is attempting to execute on its public health mission. And the public health mission of JUUL is very common for probably pretty much just about everybody who is here at the conference this week. And that is to make a serious impact on the public health of the world by finding ways to effectively reduce the use of combustible tobacco. Well, as you saw, I'm Erik Augustson. I'm the Senior Director of Behavioral Research at JUUL. Prior to that, I was at the National Cancer Institute for about 20 years. There we go. All right, so as I mentioned, JUUL has a very strong public health mission. I don't think this is unique to JUUL, but it is something that we have a strong commitment from our senior leadership, the board of investors and the CEO, all the way down to the people in the trenches. And like I said, what I want to be spending the majority of the time talking today is how JUUL is attempting to execute on that, specifically how we're trying to leverage our research program to help us achieve our public health objectives. So just a little bit of backstory. The JUUL product was initially designed by our two founders, James and Adam. They met while they were both graduate students at Stanford within the design program, and they developed a project that blended their interests in effective packaging and effective engineering. Both of them were heavy smokers, and what they were trying to do was design a product that would help them both effectively switch away from combustibles. And this is what they were trying to address. So this is the classic quandary that smokers find themselves in. These are very consistent figures since we've been tracking this for more than 30 years. We find that in any given year, about 70% of smokers report wanting to quit smoking, and somewhere around 40% of them will try, whereas less than 5% of them will successfully achieve smoking cessation. This is exactly what drove James and Adam in their attempts to design a product that could help to address this challenge. One of the things that I think can be hidden in this slide here that I think is important for us all to recognize is this is a slide about hopelessness. This is a slide about frustration and about despair. This is what we encounter when we start talking to smokers about how they feel about trying to quit smoking. Many of them are very discouraged because, as this slide indicates, typically more than 24 attempts to quit smoking. Many of them are embarrassed that they haven't been able to succeed, and many of them are unwilling to engage in the process anymore because of this history of not being able to achieve what pretty much everyone in their life is telling them that they need to achieve. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. JUUL does have a booth, which I think most of you have probably seen already. And one of the things that you will find in that booth is this exploded version of the JUUL device. Highly recommend you stop by and take a look at it, in part because it's just kind of cool to see it all broken out. But it can also give you an understanding of exactly what was involved in the fundamental design approach that the company has tried to use. And they chose to go with a closed system because this allows for better quality control of the product, and then also the ability to more consistently solve the engineering problems that have a big impact on the user experience. So this slide here, I think, is very important for us to pay attention to. And let me just see. I don't think I have a pointer on this, but this slide here encapsulates what is the fundamental challenge in trying to quit smoking and what has really driven the lack of success with alternatives that were previously on the market. So what you see here in the black line is this is the curve for the delivery of nicotine within a cigarette. One of the things that this doesn't demonstrate, though, is that when a smoker takes a hit on a cigarette, nicotine is delivered to the central nervous system, so in this case the brain, in less than 7 seconds. So this is an extremely effective nicotine delivery system. It's hard to tell, but there are dotted lines under these solid lines, which are the delivery curves of other existing traditional things that might help smokers quit. So this includes the nicotine replacement therapies as well as the curve of smokeless tobacco. One of the promises that JUUL has in potentially helping us to achieve our public health mission is the fact that you see a very similar curve to what we see in combustible tobacco. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to mimic the delivery system of a combustible product in order to try to match that curve that helps smokers to basically effectively get that drug delivered. As I said, what JUUL is attempting to do is leverage a pretty substantial research program in order to help us effectively achieve that public health mission. So we have preclinical trials, so these are the basic clinical sort of bench science approaches. We have clinical trials, which are what happens when humans actually interact with the product. And then we have a large research endeavor focused on the behavioral sciences. That's the team I lead within JUUL. And the behavioral studies, well, we'll come to that in a minute. I'll tell you what we're trying to do there. I want to highlight for you a couple of key preclinical and clinical studies. And so this slide here, when we think about harm reduction, the fundamental principle there is we must be reducing harm in some way. And so this slide here is a composite of some of the recent studies we've done that have looked at reduced exposure to the harmful and potentially harmful constituents, as well as looking at the cytotoxicity of the vaping. What we've seen across multiple assays, is somewhere between a 98 and a 99% reduction in the harmful exposures. So that's kind of like one box we can check associated with harm reduction. This is a study from the clinical team. This is a manuscript that's in preparation, will soon be submitted for peer review, where what we did is we looked at the biomarkers of exposure. We compared people who continued to smoke their regular cigarette, people who were basically abstinent from that cigarette, and then people who used JUUL. What this graph here shows is that across 5 days, we saw a substantial reduction in those biomarkers of harm, biomarkers of harm and biomarkers of exposure, such that there was no difference in the multiple assays that we ran between basically stopping smoking and using the JUUL product. And then what you'll see on the far right-hand side, that is the measure of exposure in continued smoking. So again, the take-home point here is that we do see a substantial drop in the biomarkers of exposure. Now, secondhand smoke is an important issue associated with combustible tobacco use. And so we're actively exploring different parameters of basically secondhand vape and also third-hand vape as well. So that's equivalent to the third-hand smoke. And again, what we're seeing is extremely large reductions in the harmful constituents within the exhaled vapor. Now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about what I'll say is the most important research we do, although the other research teams don't necessarily agree with that, and these are the behavioral studies. This is a very large research enterprise. By the end of 2019, we will either have completed or have in the field more than 55 behavioral studies. And I definitely want to give a shout out to one of our major partners in this endeavor, which is the Center for Substance Use Research in Glasgow. Dr. Chris Russell will be making a presentation on Friday. He'll also be talking about some of our work. And then we also have some posters in the hallway that are talking about this as well. So fundamentally, what we are trying to address is we're trying to understand patterns of use and how those patterns of use vary across specific populations. We're seeking to identify risk factors for people who do not succeed in switching in using the product. And this includes both what happens in current smokers as well as what happens in never and former smokers. We are also doing a series of projects trying to understand risk perception, both risk perception for entire categories of the product as well as those specific to JUUL. One of the key questions, one of the key reasons I was hired was to develop an understanding of what the abstinence rates are with JUUL use, again, across multiple populations, and I'll be highlighting that data in just a minute, or some of that data in a minute. And then lastly, trying to develop as accurate a picture as we can of the prevalence of the product. Again, currently most of our research is focused in the US, although we have started to expand to that. But really trying to get an accurate understanding of what the prevalence rates are in youth, young adults, and adults, as well as within nationally representative samples. So we're really trying to get a good understanding of what's going on with that. We are tracking more than 70,000 participants. In fact, we're currently over 100,000 participants who have enrolled in our various studies. A core piece of what we do is drawn from customers who have purchased the product, either in retail settings or in the e-com platforms. And as I've already said, we have plans to expand this internationally, and I'll chat about that briefly in just a second. How am I doing on time? Okay. This here is a snapshot of one of our recent studies. As I said, we have a large number of studies that contribute to this. This gives you a sense of what we're seeing in terms of the switching rates within free-range humans. So these are not humans within the context of a clinical trial. These are consumers who've purchased the product. On the far left, you see some of the data from Dr. Hayek's study, very, very important landmark study that came out this spring, looking at, in this case, smoking cessation within his trial. And what we see on the right is a comparison of our most conservative estimate of switching rates and our most optimistic estimate of switching rates. And what we're finding is that in the most conservative switching rates, we're seeing about 30%. And in this case, switching is defined as 30-day smoking abstinence, so not even a puff of a cigarette in the last month. And then on the right, you see sort of the more optimistic measure, which is among those people who responded to the survey, what were the switching rates that we see? And we see switching rates that are basically 50%. And I should also note that what you're seeing here is 3-month data. However, we've carried out these analyses on 6-month data. We've just completed 9-month data, and we'll have 12-month data by the end of the summer. What we have seen is a consistent pattern of not only those switching rates being maintained, but actually increasing over time, which is a very unusual finding within the field of tobacco control. Flavors are a very important issue that's garnered both a lot of attention within the media as well as within the public health field. What we have found, again, this is data from one particular study, but consistent, is that smokers who use the flavored versions, so these are non-tobacco and non-menthol flavors, we're seeing a substantial increase in successful switching rates amongst those populations. Now, we do still see, I think, a very impressive switching rate even amongst the classic tobacco flavor. However, it does appear as if flavors are playing an important role in switching and maintaining that switching within adult smokers. Now, if we're going to have an appropriate public health impact, it's very important that we be getting these products into the target population. JUUL has recently being like within the last 6 to 12 months, been doing a major revamp on its marketing to make a very consistent effort to engage adult smokers. This is definitely our target population. If our target population is not never smokers, it's not former smokers, and it's adult smokers. We're not attempting to target youth in any way. And these ads here represent a real concerted effort to drive that point home by changing the focus of some of the previous advertisements. I want to stop here. I have one more slide after this, but that's really a bonus slide. So this is the last key point I want to make. What you see here is a chart of increase in JUUL sales on the top, and on the bottom is the decrease of combustible tobacco. Now, I do want to make clear that we're not trying to say that JUUL is what's causing this very rapid decrease within cigarette purchases. However, we do think that the field as a whole, so the vaping field as a whole, is one of the key factors that is driving the decrease in cigarette sales. Many of you in this room have been in tobacco control for a long time. I've been in it for about 30 years. This is a truly historic drop in cigarette sales. This is something we have never seen before. And so we're definitely in for some very exciting times. I hope all of you will be contributing to the data that will help us to better understand exactly what's going on with this, as well as finding ways to increase the impact that we're having as a product category. One last slide from me. And that is that JUUL Sciences does have a website where we post a lot of our information, our papers, our posters, as well as other sort of key pieces of evidence that feed into this process. And here you see some of the stuff that's listed on the website. And I'd encourage you to go check it out. So that's my last slide. And I'm open to entertain questions at this point.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be quite strict about questions, so let's fire quick. Yep.
Okay. Have you done any measures of addiction/dependence?
Yeah. So did not present that data here today, but within the vast majority of the research that we run, we do collect questions using that modified vaping dependence scale, so, as well as a number of classic tobacco scales like the Wisdom and other traditional measures of dependence. So we do that both for cigarettes and also for vaping products, and then also specifically for JUUL. Yeah, so the question was, in order to really tap into these markets, there's a number of concerns that have to be addressed, and the specific example was India. And so what is JUUL doing to try to actively play a role in providing information to regulators within that space, which I guess is actually my answer. JUUL is actively playing a role, both in terms of trying to effectively disseminate the research that we've already collected, as well as expand our international surveys so we can understand what's happening within specific countries. And again, this is something that I encourage all of you to actively be contributing to, which is taking our data, effectively disseminating it both to our peers within public health and within tobacco control and within research, as well as working to effectively take that information and make it available to regulators so that they can be making data-driven, informed decisions as opposed to decisions that are driven by some of the passions that are common within humans.
One of the aim is, I'm Dr. Agarwal from India. You said that one of our main aim is, and our target is combustible tobacco smokers who are adults. That means we want to target them to quit smoking. At an international level, do we have a standard protocol for the doctors? I'm talking about internationally. Say, for example, if a doctor wants to open a clinic and he says, I want to have my patients quit smoking using, say, JUUL cigarette, electronic cigarette. Is there a standard protocol available, even if it is not in the knowledge or consent with the regulators? At least it can have from the medical profession or a medical doctors who are using this protocol, and they say this protocol is successful.
So the question is basically, physicians and other healthcare workers are the front line of interacting with smokers on a regular basis. Are we helping them to effectively use, whether it's JUUL or another vaping device, to effectively use that to help their smokers? So at this time, there is not a standard protocol to do that, and part of the reason is the regulatory restrictions that we're under. However, the two people who are sitting right behind you, to your left, are both JUUL employees who are working on trying to identify strategies to effectively engage healthcare workers if they do choose this is something that they want to do with their patients. So again, we don't have a standard protocol right now, but it is something that's being developed. And to tie in that whole science aspect, any program that we move forward will have to have an evaluation component built into it, because otherwise, how do we know we're being an effective steward within the space if we're not evaluating the programs that we're doing?
I can see one more there.
Okay.
John, can I suggest that people say their name and their country they're from?
Okay. John Nelson, Cigarette Direct UK. Do you have any parallel studies ongoing in the UK where the JUUL product is a compromise on the US product due to the restrictions in nicotine concentration? And so my question really is, how important is nicotine concentration in the efficacy of this product, and will you use that to inform other countries' regulatory frameworks?
Yeah, outstanding question. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is that part of our international efforts are to be doing surveys in countries that have different strengths available. A key country where we're actively collecting data is the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom is a wonderful laboratory space, if you will, for us to be in for a couple of reasons. One, that the regulators there have actively embraced vaping as a potential smoking cessation product, which is unique in many parts of the country or parts of the world. But then also, as you said, has a lower nicotine concentration. And so we're in the process of collecting data. For example, one of our core things we're doing now is comparing the US, the UK, and Canada to try to understand how the product patterns of use vary across country, and how the different nicotine concentrations are potentially affecting the outcomes. So yes, outstanding question.
I'm going to finish that there.
Yep.
So we keep to time. Thank you very much, Eric. Illuminating, very good.